September 3rd, 1943. A research facility on the outskirts of Tokyo. Rain pattered against the laboratory windows as Professor Hiroshi Tanaka stared at the test results spread across his desk, his face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The data confirmed what the Imperial Japanese Navy had suspected for months. Their aircraft were being consistently outperformed in the Pacific theater. What Tanaka did not yet realize was that these results would fundamentally alter his understanding of the industrial gap between Japan and America, a revelation that would haunt him long after the conflict ended. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a small team of Japanese scientists uncovered a devastating truth about their nation's technological capabilities through a simple laboratory test, and how this discovery rippled through the highest levels of Japanese military command, forcing them to confront the stark reality of American industrial might in ways no battlefield encounter ever could. Hiroshi Tanaka had not always been a military researcher. Before the war, he had been a respected petroleum chemist at Tokyo Imperial University, publishing papers in international journals and corresponding with colleagues in America and Europe. Now, at 43 years old, his expertise had been redirected toward the war effort, specifically to solving the persistent problems plaguing Japanese aircraft engines. "These samples arrived yesterday," said Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Nakamura, the naval liaison assigned to the research facility. "Taken from a downed American fighter near Rabaul, engineering says it's nearly intact, an exceptional find." Nakamura was 36, a career officer who'd been reassigned to research coordination after losing 2 fingers on his left hand during an engagement in the South China Sea. His knowledge of chemistry was limited, but his understanding of what the Navy needed was precise. "The Americans are flying higher, faster, and farther," Nakamura continued. "Our pilots report their engines run smoother, even after extended operations. High Command wants answers, not excuses." Tanaka nodded, carefully examining the metal container that held approximately 1 liter of aviation fuel. "We'll begin analysis immediately. I'll need Yamamoto and Sato for this work." "You have 3 days, Professor," Nakamura said, checking his watch. "I'll return on Friday for preliminary findings." After Nakamura left, Tanaka summoned his 2 assistants. Kenji Yamamoto was a brilliant 29-year-old fuel specialist who had studied briefly at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology before being recalled to Japan in 1941 when relations deteriorated. Akiko Sato, 31, specialized in engine performance testing and had joined the research team after her husband, a naval aviator, had gone missing during operations over the Philippines. "American aviation fuel," Tanaka explained, carefully opening the container. "Our task is to determine its properties and composition." The 3 researchers worked methodically, transferring samples into various testing apparatus. The initial results were puzzling. The viscosity, freezing point, and basic composition appeared similar to Japanese aviation fuel, yet preliminary engine tests showed markedly different performance characteristics. "The octane rating is extraordinary," Yamamoto noted, checking his calculations twice. "If these readings are correct, it's significantly higher than our best fuel." Sato frowned, adjusting her spectacles. "That would explain the performance reports from the front. Higher octane means more power, better altitude capability, and improved fuel efficiency." "Run the tests again," Tanaka instructed. "We need absolute certainty before reporting these findings." 3 days later, Lieutenant Commander Nakamura returned as promised, joined by Captain Toshiro Yamada from Naval Aviation Headquarters. Captain Yamada was a barrel-chested man of 50, with a reputation for directness and technical competence unusual among senior officers. "Well, Professor, what have you discovered?" Captain Yamada demanded, declining the offered tea. Tanaka took a deep breath. "The American fuel has an octane rating of approximately 100. Our best aviation fuel achieves only 87 to 92, depending on the production facility." Yamada's expression remained neutral, but Nakamura visibly stiffened. "That cannot be correct," Nakamura said. "Our intelligence indicated American fuel was comparable to ours. The intelligence was wrong, Tanaka replied firmly. Moreover, we've identified tetraethyl lead compounds and other additives our industry isn't currently using. These prevent engine knocking at high performance settings. Can we reproduce this formula? Captain Yamada asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Tanaka exchanged glances with his assistants before responding. Theoretically, yes. Practically. So that's a more difficult question. The production techniques require sophisticated equipment and chemical processes that our petroleum industry has not yet mastered. Captain Yamada's face darkened. Unacceptable. America was purchasing oil from us before the war. How can they now produce superior aviation fuel? Yamamoto cleared his throat nervously. Captain, if I may, while Japan had oil resources in its territories, refining technology is a different matter. American petroleum engineering has been advancing rapidly since the 1920s. What about these additives? Nakamura interjected. Can we not simply incorporate them into our existing fuel production? Sato shook her head. It's not that simple, Commander. The entire production process is different, from distillation to the final blending. We would need to rebuild our refineries and develop new catalytic processes. The implications hung heavily in the air. In a war increasingly defined by aerial combat, the Japanese were flying with a significant disadvantage that could not be quickly overcome. Captain Yamada stood abruptly. I want a complete written report by tomorrow morning. Include practical recommendations, not just problems. He paused at the door. And this information does not leave this room. Understood? After the naval officers departed, the three researchers sat in silence for several moments. We have to be absolutely precise in our report, Tanaka finally said. Lives depend on our accuracy. Later that evening, as Tanaka worked alone in the laboratory, the significance of their discovery weighed heavily on him. He thought back to a conference he had attended in Philadelphia in 1938, where an American petroleum engineer had casually mentioned their new high-octane fuel production capabilities. At the time, Tanaka had considered it typical American boasting. Now he realized it had been simple truth. The next day, their report was delivered to Naval Headquarters. 3 days later, Tanaka was summoned to an unusual meeting at the Ministry of War, a sprawling complex in central Tokyo where military and civilian leaders coordinated Japan's war effort. The conference room contained an unexpected assembly of high-ranking officials. Rear Admiral Soemu Toyoda from Naval Intelligence, 3 representatives from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, the director of the Petroleum Control Agency, and executives from Japan's 2 largest petroleum companies. Admiral Toyoda opened the meeting without preamble. Professor Tanaka, please summarize your findings for everyone present. Tanaka explained their analysis of the American aviation fuel, its superior performance characteristics, and the technological gap it represented. As he spoke, he noticed the petroleum executives exchanging concerned glances. This is consistent with other intelligence, Admiral Toyoda said when Tanaka finished. American aircraft performance has been improving, while ours has remained relatively static. Now we understand one significant factor. Hisao Kobayashi, the elder of the petroleum executives, cleared his throat. With respect, Admiral, we have been warning about fuel quality issues since before the conflict began. Our requests for investment in advanced refining technology were repeatedly deferred in favor of immediate production quantity. That is irrelevant now, snapped one of the ministry officials. What matters is how quickly we can close this gap. Professor Tanaka, what do you recommend? Tanaka had anticipated this question. In the short term, we must adjust our aircraft engines to perform optimally with the fuel we have, rather than attempting to match American fuel quality immediately. Concurrently, we should begin modernizing at least 2 refineries with the necessary equipment for higher octane production. How long would such modernization take? Admiral Toyoda asked. 18 months at minimum, Kobayashi answered before Tanaka could speak. And that assumes we can acquire the necessary equipment and technical expertise, which is doubtful under current conditions. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. For the next year and a half, at minimum, Japanese aircraft would be operating at a significant disadvantage. There may be another approach, Tanaka suggested. We've identified certain additives that could modestly improve our current fuel without requiring complete refinery modernization. With focused effort, this could be implemented within 4 to 6 months. This compromise was seized upon eagerly by the military representatives who demanded immediate action. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Toyoda asked Tanaka to remain behind. "How you understand the significance of your findings, Professor?" the Admiral asked when they were alone. "I believe so, sir." "No, I don't think you do. This isn't merely about aircraft performance. This is about industrial capacity." The Admiral walked to a large map on the wall. "America is outproducing us not just in quantity but in quality. They're making better aviation fuel, better steel, better rubber, while fighting a two-front war." Tanaka had no response. "I've read your pre-war publications, Professor. You had American colleagues, didn't you?" "Yes, several." "Did you ever visit their research facilities?" Tanaka nodded. "I toured Standard Oil's laboratory in New Jersey and a research center in California." "And how did they compare to ours?" Tanaka hesitated, then answered honestly. "They were larger, better equipped. Their research budgets were substantial." Admiral Toyoda nodded grimly. "We attacked a giant and awakened it. Now we're beginning to understand its true strength." He dismissed Tanaka with a wave. "Implement your additive program. Every small improvement matters now." Over the following weeks, Tanaka and his team worked feverishly to develop fuel additives that could be implemented within Japan's existing production framework. The challenge was formidable. They needed solutions that could be applied immediately, using available materials, while providing meaningful performance improvements. Major General Takeo Yasuda from the Army Air Service visited the laboratory frequently during this period, bringing test pilots to consult on engine performance issues. Unlike many Army officers, Yasuda had an engineering background and grasped the technical challenges they faced. "Our pilots are flying against American aircraft that climb faster and turn tighter," Yasuda explained during one visit. "Every little bit of engine performance could mean the difference between returning home or not." Yasuda brought with him Captain Ichiro Hayashi, a veteran pilot with over 30 combat missions. Hayashi's insights proved invaluable, describing in detail the performance differences he had observed firsthand. "At higher altitudes, our engines begin to sputter," Hayashi explained. "The Americans seem to have no such limitations. They can climb above us, then dive down with superior speed. We must sacrifice ammunition loads to maintain maneuverability." This practical perspective helped focus their research. By early November, they had developed a manganese-based additive that showed promise, improving octane ratings by approximately 3 points without requiring major production changes. Simultaneously, Tanaka had been authorized to establish a more ambitious research program aimed at longer-term fuel improvements. For this work, he recruited additional scientists, including Dr. Hideki Nomura, a catalytic chemistry specialist who had previously worked for the Manchurian Petroleum Company. "The Americans are using catalytic cracking extensively," Nomura explained to the team during his first briefing. "This process fundamentally changes how refineries operate, yielding both higher quantities and quality of aviation gasoline." Yamamoto, who had seen such facilities during his time in America, elaborated further. "Their refineries are massive operations, highly automated, with continuous processing. Ours still rely heavily on batch processing and more primitive thermal cracking." This technological gap reflected a more profound industrial disparity that few in Japan had fully appreciated before the war. America's petroleum industry had evolved through decades of private investment and innovation, while Japan's had developed primarily through government direction focused on immediate needs rather than fundamental advancement. As 1943 drew to a close, Tanaka's team achieved modest success with their additive program. Laboratory tests showed a 5 to 7% improvement in engine performance using the modified fuel. Production began at 2 refineries in December, with the first batches of improved fuel reaching frontline units in January 1944. The feedback from the field was mixed. Pilots reported slight improvements in engine reliability and performance, but nothing that fundamentally altered the balance of aerial combat. American aircraft continued to demonstrate superior capabilities, particularly at higher altitudes. In February 1944, Tanaka received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Werner Schmidt, a German chemical engineer sent as part of the technical exchange program between the Axis powers, arrived with data from Germany's synthetic fuel program. The Luftwaffe has faced similar challenges, Schmidt explained, his Japanese surprisingly fluent from years spent working in Manchuria before the war. Our solution has been to produce synthetic fuel from coal, using the Fischer-Tropsch process. Tanaka and his team reviewed the German data with great interest. The synthetic fuel approach was ingenious, but required enormous industrial infrastructure that Japan simply didn't possess. This would take years to implement, Yamamoto observed, and require resources we don't have. Schmidt nodded grimly. Germany began this program in the 1930s as part of our preparation. It is not a solution you can implement quickly, but perhaps some elements of our additive chemistry could be useful to your efforts. The German visit highlighted another dimension of the Axis powers' industrial disadvantage. While Germany had anticipated some of these challenges and prepared accordingly, Japan had entered the conflict with less industrial readiness in critical areas like fuel production. By spring 1944, the war situation had deteriorated further. American bombing raids were increasingly targeting Japan's petroleum infrastructure, making any major refinery improvements nearly impossible. Tanaka's team was forced to focus on ever more pragmatic approaches, ways to stretch existing fuel supplies while maintaining minimum performance standards. In April, they received an intelligence windfall, detailed analysis of American aviation fuel production methods, obtained through diplomatic channels in neutral countries. The documents confirmed what they had already discovered about octane ratings, but provided new insights into the specific catalytic processes used. "This is remarkable," Nomura said after studying the reports. "Their production efficiency is approximately 3 times ours per unit of raw petroleum. Even if we had identical raw materials, they would produce 3 times the aviation fuel." This efficiency gap had profound strategic implications. Even if Japan could somehow match American fuel quality, it could never match production quantity with existing technology. The industrial disparity was simply too great. In May, Tanaka was summoned to another high-level meeting, this time aboard the battleship Nagato in Yokosuka Harbor. The venue was chosen for security, away from potential American intelligence in Tokyo. The meeting included Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, several senior staff officers, and representatives from major industrial concerns, including Mitsubishi and Nakajima, Japan's primary aircraft manufacturers. Admiral Onishi began bluntly, "Gentlemen, our position grows more challenging each day. The Americans are deploying new aircraft with performance capabilities our current designs cannot match. Professor Tanaka, how much of this disparity is due to fuel quality?" Tanaka considered his words carefully. "Fuel is a significant factor, Admiral, but not the only one. American engines are also more advanced in design, using better materials and more precise manufacturing. These advantages compound each other." Masatake Okumiya, a naval staff officer who had extensively analyzed combat reports, added, "Our pilots consistently report that American fighters maintain performance during extended engagements, while our aircraft show noticeable degradation after intense maneuvering." Jiro Horikoshi, the chief designer from Mitsubishi responsible for several Japanese fighter aircraft, including the renowned A6M, spoke next. "We've been designing our engines to operate with the fuel available to us. If we had known about this quality disparity earlier, our design approaches might have been different." This comment provoked visible tension in the room. Why hadn't this critical information been shared earlier? The answer, though unspoken, was understood by all present. Bureaucratic barriers and the military's reluctance to acknowledge shortcomings had prevented effective collaboration. "What can be done now?" Admiral Onishi asked, redirecting the discussion to practical matters. Tanaka presented their current efforts, including the additive program and more ambitious research initiatives. The industrial representatives outlined plans to modify engine designs to better utilize available fuel, while naval officers described tactical adaptations to compensate for performance disadvantages. As the meeting progressed, a sobering consensus emerged. Japan could not win a war of industrial capacity against the United States. Their only hope lay in a negotiated peace, which would require maintaining sufficient military capability to make the cost of total victory unacceptable to America. Following this meeting, Tanaka's research received increased funding and priority. His team expanded to over 30 scientists working across multiple facilities. By July 1944, they had developed a more effective additive package that increased octane ratings by nearly 8 points, a significant improvement given the constraints they faced. This modified fuel began reaching frontline units in September, just as American forces were advancing through the Pacific with increasing momentum. Pilot reports indicated noticeable improvements, particularly in engine reliability during high-stress maneuvers, but the fundamental performance gap remained. In October, disaster struck when American bombing raids damaged one of the refineries producing the improved fuel. Production was disrupted for nearly 3 weeks, forcing many aircraft units to revert to standard fuel. This illustrated another critical vulnerability. Even when technical solutions were developed, Japan's increasingly fragile infrastructure made consistent implementation difficult. As 1944 drew to a close, Tanaka's team faced a new challenge. Fuel quantity was becoming as critical as quality. American submarine warfare had dramatically reduced oil imports from conquered territories in Southeast Asia, forcing Japan to rely increasingly on diminishing stockpiles and synthetic alternatives. "We must now focus on efficiency as much as performance," Tanaka told his team, developing fuel mixtures that extend range and endurance, even at some cost to peak performance. This pivot reflected the grim strategic reality. Japan was no longer fighting for victory, but for survival, hoping to inflict sufficient costs on American forces to achieve some form of negotiated settlement. By early 1945, the situation had grown desperate. Many research facilities had been relocated to bunkers or rural areas to escape bombing. Tanaka's team, now working from a converted sake brewery in Nagano Prefecture, continued their efforts despite increasingly severe resource constraints. In March, they achieved a bittersweet breakthrough. Using techniques adapted from German synthetic fuel research and their own innovations, they developed a process for producing aviation fuel with performance characteristics much closer to American standards. Laboratory tests showed octane ratings of 97 to 98, approaching the American century mark. "Remarkable work," Lieutenant Commander Nakamura said when they demonstrated the results. "Truly remarkable." The achievement was scientifically significant, but strategically irrelevant. Japan no longer possessed the industrial capacity to implement such processes on a meaningful scale. Raw materials were critically scarce, and many refineries had been damaged or destroyed. In April 1945, Tanaka received a visit from his old university colleague, Professor Hideki Yukawa, a theoretical physicist who would later become Japan's first Nobel laureate. "Your fuel research has been important," Yukawa said as they walked through the makeshift laboratory, "but I fear we have been solving the wrong problems all along." "What do you mean?" Tanaka asked. "We have been trying to match American technology component by component, their aviation fuel, their radar, their naval engineering. But their real advantage isn't in any specific technology. It's their system, their industrial base, their scientific infrastructure, their production methods." Yukawa sighed. "We began this conflict without truly understanding what modern war requires." This observation resonated deeply with Tanaka, who had seen firsthand the systematic advantages American industry possessed. It wasn't simply a matter of resources or individual technologies, but a fundamentally different approach to industrial organization and scientific research. In May, as American bombing intensified and Japan's situation grew increasingly desperate, Tanaka received orders to document all his research for preservation. The implication was clear. Defeat was now considered inevitable, and knowledge must be preserved for Japan's eventual rebuilding. "Ensure all technical data is properly recorded," the directive stated. "Particular attention should be paid to innovations that may have civilian applications in the post-war period." This marked a profound shift in priority. Rather than supporting the war effort, Tanaka was now effectively working to preserve technical knowledge for Japan's future reconstruction. In these final months, Tanaka often reflected on his pre-war visits to American research facilities. He recalled a conversation with Dr. William Morris, a petroleum engineer at Standard Oil, during a conference in 1938. "Our new catalytic cracking units will revolutionize fuel production," Morris had explained enthusiastically. "Higher octane, greater yield, more efficient processes." When Tanaka had asked about Japan implementing similar technology, Morris had responded candidly, "It's not just about the equipment, Hiroshi. It's about the entire system, the educational pipeline producing chemical engineers, the corporate research culture, the scale of investment. These things take decades to develop." At the time, Tanaka had felt a flash of nationalist indignation at what seemed like American condescension. Now, with the benefit of bitter experience, he recognized the simple truth in Morris's assessment. In July 1945, with American forces preparing for what would have been a devastating invasion of the Japanese home islands, Tanaka received unexpected orders to destroy certain research records while preserving others. Records relating to current military applications should be disposed of, the directive stated. Fundamental research with post-war industrial applications should be secured in multiple locations. This selective preservation reflected a strategic calculation by certain forward-thinking officials. Japan would need to rebuild its industrial capacity after the war, and scientific knowledge would be essential to that process. On August 6th and 9th, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing the conflict to its cataclysmic conclusion. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast to the nation. 3 days later, Tanaka sat in his modest home in Tokyo, systematically burning his personal journals and certain technical papers as instructed. As he fed documents into a small metal drum in his garden, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a sample of American aviation fuel almost 2 years earlier. The technical gap they had discovered was merely a symptom of a much larger disparity, one that many Japanese leaders had failed to fully comprehend until it was too late. America's industrial might, its scientific infrastructure, and its production capacity had proven decisive in ways that courage, sacrifice, and tactical brilliance could not overcome. In October 1945, during the early occupation period, Tanaka received an unexpected visitor. Captain James Harrison of the U.S. Naval Technical Mission arrived at his home with an interpreter, seeking information about Japan's wartime fuel research. "Professor Tanaka," Harrison began after introductions, "we're assessing Japanese technical developments during the war. Your work on aviation fuel is of particular interest." Tanaka provided a thorough overview of their research, including the challenges they had faced and the solutions they had developed. Harrison took detailed notes, occasionally asking precise technical questions that revealed his own expertise in petroleum chemistry. Near the end of their conversation, Harrison asked a more personal question. "When did you realize the extent of the technical gap in fuel production?" Tanaka considered this carefully before answering. "I think we understood the measurements, the octane differences, the performance variations, from our initial tests in 1943. But truly understanding what those numbers meant, what they represented in terms of industrial capacity, that realization came more slowly." Harrison nodded. "It's been the same on our side. Our intelligence knew Japan was struggling with fuel quality, but we've only recently begun to appreciate the systematic nature of the advantages we held." As Harrison prepared to leave, he made an unexpected offer. "Professor, we're establishing research cooperation programs as part of the reconstruction efforts. Your expertise would be valuable. Would you be interested in consulting on petroleum refining modernization?" This offer represented something Tanaka had not dared hope for, a chance to help rebuild Japan's industrial base with modern technology. It was also, he recognized, part of America's strategic calculation. A prosperous, industrialized Japan would be a bulwark against Soviet influence in Asia. In the years following the war, Tanaka worked extensively with American petroleum companies, establishing modern refining operations in Japan. The technological transfer that occurred during this period laid the groundwork for Japan's remarkable industrial renaissance in the 1950s and 60s. By 1955, Japanese refineries were producing aviation fuel meeting international standards, supplying Japan's newly re-established civilian aviation industry. The quality gap that had seemed so insurmountable during the war had been closed through systematic technology transfer and investment. In 1960, Tanaka published a technical history of Japanese petroleum development, including carefully sanitized accounts of wartime research. The book became required reading for chemical engineering students and petroleum industry executives, a reminder of both technological lessons and their broader implications. At a petroleum conference in Houston in 1962, Tanaka encountered Dr. William Morris, the American engineer whose pre-war comments had once seemed so condescending. "Professor Tanaka," Morris greeted him warmly, "I've been following your work on catalytic reforming. Impressive advances." "We've had good teachers," Tanaka replied with a slight smile. "American technology transfer has been generous," Morris nodded. "Self-interest, really. We need strong trading partners and allies. But I'm curious, during the war, how close did Japan come to solving its aviation fuel problems?" Tanaka considered this. "We made incremental improvements, but we never closed the fundamental gap. We were trying to solve a technical problem that was really an industrial system problem." "That's often the case," Morris agreed. "Technology exists within systems: educational, industrial, governmental. The most brilliant scientists cannot overcome fundamental systemic limitations." This observation encapsulated what Tanaka had come to recognize as the deepest lesson of his wartime experience. Technical knowledge alone was insufficient. It had to be embedded within supportive systems of education, investment, and industrial organization to reach its full potential. In 1970, as Japan's economic miracle was in full swing, with Japanese automobiles, electronics, and industrial products gaining worldwide recognition for their quality, Tanaka gave a lecture to engineering students at Tokyo University. "The most important scientific instrument," he told them, "is not the microscope or the spectrometer, but the industrial system that enables research to become practical reality. Japan's greatest post-war achievement has not been any single technological breakthrough, but the creation of an industrial system that enables continuous innovation and improvement." This philosophy, emphasizing systematic approaches to quality and continuous improvement, would become central to Japan's industrial methodology, eventually influencing global manufacturing practices through concepts like total quality management and just-in-time production. Tanaka never spoke publicly about his wartime research until shortly before his death in 1983, when he gave a single interview to a technical journal. Even then, he focused on the scientific challenges rather than their military implications. "We were confronted with a problem that appeared technical on the surface, aviation fuel performance, but was actually much deeper. It was a window into fundamental disparities in industrial capacity and organization," he explained. "Perhaps the most valuable outcome was not our modest technical achievements during the war, but the lessons applied during Reconstruction. We learned to build not just better refineries, but better systems for continuous industrial advancement." This systematic approach to industrial development became one of Japan's most significant exports, not a physical product, but a methodology for organizing production and research that companies worldwide would eventually adopt. From a sample of American aviation fuel in a Tokyo laboratory to global industrial practices that continue to this day, the journey that began with Professor Tanaka's discovery illustrates how technological gaps often reflect deeper systematic differences, and how understanding these differences can transform not just technical outcomes, but entire industrial civilizations. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.